Hello, House of Blessing Church. Been thinking about you, praying about you all this week. I know it's been a really rough week. Let's hang in there. It won't always be like this. We're in God's hands. It's a good place to be. I would like to share a sermon with you today that's following in the 4 o'clock service sermon schedule, talking about radical discipleship. And today the message is on radical servanthood. And so I want to start out with this picture. Tell me, have you ever seen something like this? What is this? It's turtle stack. I think you've probably seen this before. Have you ever wondered, why do turtles do this? Well, there might be other explanations, but to me it looks like dominance, trying to achieve dominance over others. Many animals actually do this. Here we can see foxes doing this. We humans, we're more civilized, so we do it like this. Alright, so this is a bit of a joke. However, in the business world, we really do try to gain dominance over one another by improving our chances for getting ahead. We do extra things like getting more education or certificates so that we can get an advantage. We call this climbing the corporate ladder, right? Well, when does this kind of a mentality begin? It starts in childhood. Actually, like even in elementary school, kids have a pecking order. My kids, they come home from their classes telling me about the unofficial leaders in the class and their cronies, right? It's something that we all kind of pick up early on. There's something special about kids before they reach this point, though. I can see it in this little guy. You can see Boaz here. This is my friend Jack and Linda's little boy. He just loves to help. He doesn't ask too many questions like, what's in it for me? He's really just happy to help out. So the point here is that there's something precious about children before they reach that age where they want to achieve dominance over others. Something precious about this childlike, humble character. Today I want to share from Jesus, where he gives a lesson about radical servanthood from this kind of childlike character. We're mostly in the book of Matthew, and at this time the disciples had been following Jesus on the field for about 3 years. And it was right about then that the disciples were starting to think beyond the field, to the future. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? You might say, this is a pretty honest question, right? We all want to establish an understanding of who's in charge. That's why in almost every alien invasion movie, we see the aliens say, take me to your leader. Right? It's natural to want to know who's going to be in charge around here later on. Fair enough. But let's see what Jesus' answer is. He called a little child and had him stand among them. And he said, I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So basically, Jesus' answer to the question, who's the greatest in the kingdom, is this: whoever has this humble, childlike character. It's like that little boy who's just happy to help. He's not concerned about controlling others or manipulating a situation. Actually, it's kind of revealing that the disciples even asked this question. It reveals their motivation. I say this because this incident, it's really only the first time in kind of a string of incidents with the same topic, same issue. Let's look next at Mark chapter 9. They came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, what were you arguing about on the road? But they kept quiet because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Apparently there was this secret argument going on among the disciples about who should be in the leadership position. It doesn't look quite as innocent the second time. They were jockeying for position. Like when there's a horse race and they all start at the same time, but each rider is trying to get in the lead. In the business world, as I mentioned before, we refer to climbing the corporate ladder. But it's not just one person on the ladder, right? There are others climbing too. And when we add this type of competitive ambition to the climb, it turns out to be more of a race to the top. Like these guys. And what's at the top anyway, really? Well, the boss is at the top. Everyone else works for him. The higher you get on the ladder, the more important you are, the more respect you have, more power, more honor, not to mention better pay, right? More pay means a more comfortable lifestyle. Notice that the people on the bottom are hard working. This sort of implies that the higher you get, the less strenuous it is. I think we're all pretty familiar with this kind of a system. We'll represent this system with a pyramid or a triangle here. In this system, the greatest is on top. So it seems the disciples were looking forward to the time Jesus becomes the king or the guy on top. And the question they're all asking is, which one of us is going to be next on the ladder after Jesus? I don't think the argument was very humble. You know, like Matthew, you really are better with numbers and details. I really think you should be Jesus' #1 guy. No, I think it was probably a little bit more like if they could each have their own vote, they'd be voting for themselves. So they've just gotten in from a long walk and they're sitting in the house and Jesus asks them, what were you guys talking about? And they were all silent. Awkward, right? Well, what's going on? It seems that they were embarrassed about their ambition. But why? Well, it's because this characteristic is the exact opposite of what Jesus said is the greatest in the kingdom. But Jesus knew what they were talking about, and so let's see what he says. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all. What does that even look like? What Jesus is proposing looks like this. Here, the greatest is on bottom. Some of you might think this is strange or ask what's going on here. Well, Jesus explains some more, but I want to ask first, how many of you are teachers? I know our church has a lot of teachers. And so, as we read this next part, you teachers are going to identify with the headache that Jesus is just about to have. This is the headache that comes from dealing with the requests of your students' parents. Look at Matthew chapter 20, verse 20. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons, and kneeling down, asked a favor of him. Now this is the mother of James and John, 2 brothers, both are Jesus' disciples, and their mother comes to Jesus and kneels as she asks a request of her son's teachers. Now all the teachers who are listening can sense the headache that's coming. You know it's not going to be good, and that's not only because it's 2020. By the way, that's a joke. What is it you want? He asked. She said, grant that one of these 2 sons of mine may sit at your right hand and the other at your left in your kingdom. What is she talking about? Well, she has the triangle in mind, and she wants her sons to sit at Jesus' right and left when Jesus is at the top. That means she wants her sons to have the authority, favor, prominence, recognition, and prestige that comes with being close to the top of the pyramid. Why would she ask for this? Well, at the bottom line is, I think it's ambition. She wants her sons to be great because it's great to be the mother of successful people. People at the top of the triangle, they don't let their mothers live in poverty. It's a good retirement plan for her. About now, I think Jesus was probably getting that headache that we were talking about. So let's look at his response. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said. In a few short weeks, she would actually see Jesus crucified. She was there. She saw him die. There was a man on his right and another one on his left. There were other men being crucified. These were not places anyone wants to see their children. Next, he turns and he addressed the 2 brothers. He asked, can you drink the cup I'm going to drink? We can, they answered. What is this cup? Well, it's not some germaphobe COVID thing. Do you mind sharing germs with me? No, it's not that. Instead, the cup is a symbol of suffering. We also see Jesus talk about this cup before he was arrested and tortured and killed. He prayed this, Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. This is a reference to the suffering that he knew that he was about to endure. So back to the conversation with John and James and their mother. He asked them, can you drink the cup I'm going to drink? He's asking them, are you willing to endure the kind of suffering I will endure? We can, they say. You've got to wonder if they really knew what they were saying. And the answer, no, they really didn't. You will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father." Jesus knew how their lives would unfold and how they would suffer for God's kingdom. We'll look at that more in just a bit. For now, Jesus assures them that those places of authority next in command on the pyramid aren't his to give away. Well, why, you might ask? Well, because he himself is under the authority of another. He must submit to the plan of God the Father. For example, we saw earlier, when Jesus was in the garden just before he was arrested, he prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Paul also writes about this in Philippians. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. So, humble obedience isn't just what Jesus asked of his disciples. It's the example that he lived. So let's move on. Now, how did the other 10 disciples respond when they heard that James and John had their mom come and beg Jesus to give her boys a place of power? When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the two brothers. Now, they were probably mostly just upset that they didn't think of it first. Man, why didn't I think of that? Jesus called them all together to set them straight. "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Jesus is comparing the two models of authority here. First, he says that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. Does this sound familiar? This is the pyramid that we've been talking about. But that's not the system Jesus uses. As he said, "Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave." What does that even look like? Well, it looks like what we saw before. Instead of the greatest being at the top of the pyramid, and everyone works hard to serve him, we turn the whole pyramid upside down. So the greatest is at the bottom and becomes the servant. He used the word slave. He works harder than anyone else on the entire upside down system. After hearing that, I wonder if any of them still had any interest in becoming great. Jesus knew that this upside down system of greatness was hard for them to imagine. They would need an example to see what he really meant. So he explained it like this: "Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." We know that when Jesus says the Son of Man, he's talking about himself. So he's going to lead by example. Let's see that example. So in John chapter 13, we'll see what it looks like to be the greatest in Jesus' system. Here, Jesus is having dinner with his 12 disciples. It's the last time that he will be with them having dinner together before he's arrested. They've all just come in from outside, and they've got dusty, dirty feet. The custom at that time was to have a slave wash the feet of everyone else when they came in for dinner. The evening meal was in progress, so he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He took off his normal clothes and put on the clothes of a slave. Then he began to do the work of a slave, washing feet. If that's hard for you to get, you're not alone. If a teacher did that for his students, it would seem really backwards. But he's more than a teacher, he's God. So, if you're struggling mentally to grasp what Jesus is doing, you're not alone. In fact, his disciple Peter had a hard time understanding it too. Let's read on. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." Notice that Jesus said, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." This is a requirement for being able to identify with Jesus. Peter had to allow Jesus to serve him. Why? We must all be reliant on Jesus. There is no one who can save themselves and become part of God's team. The only way to join is by relying on him to first serve us. I want to pause here for just a moment to give you all a quick look at who else is around the table with Peter. First, there's Thomas, who actually doubted that Jesus could even really raise from the dead. There's Matthew, who used to be a tax collector and cheat people out of their money. Not far from Jesus' seat was Judas, who had already betrayed Jesus into the hands of killers. Even Peter would deny even knowing Jesus 3 times. Remember that they were all arguing about who is the greatest among them. None of these guys were worthy to have the God of the universe washing their feet like a slave. But he washed them, not because of how worthy they are, but because of how humble he is. If you've never taken time to think about that, I hope you'll take this thought with you. He doesn't show his love to anyone because of how worthy they are, but because of how humble he is. Continuing, after he was done washing their feet, this is what he said. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." He's not denying that he's Lord. Rather, he's teaching them by example what it means to have authority and power in his kingdom. This is radical servanthood. If the master is humble enough to serve by washing the feet of those who are unworthy, then no one under his masterhood, his leadership, can possibly claim to be too good to do such an act of service for others. So here's the big point I want to draw out. Following Jesus means humble service to others, regardless of their faults or failures, not because they deserve it, but because that's how our master served us. Now, I want to come back to the cup we were talking about just earlier. What does it look like to drink from Jesus' cup? Does it mean that we have to be crucified? Let me start by saying this. It's not the same for everyone. We Christians, we all start in the same place, sinners in need of a Savior. We all end up in the same place. We arrive in heaven, saved by grace. The details between, however, are not going to be the same for everyone. Remember that James and John said, "We can drink from your cup, Jesus." And he affirmed them. Yes, he said, you will. What did that look like? Neither of them were crucified. In Acts chapter 12, we can see what the cup looked like for James. James was arrested in Jerusalem, and King Herod had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. Now, James, he died at an early age as a martyr, giving his life for sharing Jesus' message. Well, what about John? Did he have a similar fate? Actually, John outlived all the other 12 disciples. Tradition tells us that he lived to be pretty close to 100 years old and died of natural causes. For him, drinking Jesus' cup meant many long years of struggle and heartbreak. He worked tirelessly to encourage the early church, to help them through the persecutions and heresies that would try to derail this new movement. He saw some of those he cared for killed for their faith, like his brother was. He saw others turn away when persecutions came, yet others he saw turn to other teachings that included less suffering. But he continued, and because of his faithful service over the years, the church grew in number and in strength. That's very different from his brother James, who died early. Which is better? It's hard to say. One Roman scholar tells of a coin that was found with a picture of an ox engraved on it. Behind it, on one side, was an altar. This is where an animal gave its life in a short moment of service. On the other side, there was also a plow. This is the tool on which an ox would spend many long years working in the heat of the day in service. Now, the words were inscribed beneath it, ready for either. The ox had to be ready for either the supreme moment of sacrifice on the altar or a long life of labor on a farm. Why would I bring this up? Well, when we talk about suffering for God, there is no one cup of suffering for the Christian to drink. To drink the cup of suffering may be one great moment of ultimate sacrifice, like it was for James, or it may be spread throughout a long lifetime of Christian service and faithfulness, like John. To drink the cup simply means to follow Christ wherever he may lead, to be like him in whatever situation life brings. This is like what Paul spoke about in Romans when he said, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. And so I want to bring up another lesson from this. Radical servanthood may look different for each of us, but it will absolutely include following Jesus' example of humble service. When I say, Jesus, I will follow you, I might be thinking of a destination, eternal glory in heaven. But in order to get to Jesus' destination, first we have to follow the path that he took. You might ask, does this include ultimate sacrifice? Well, perhaps it does for some. Others might ask, does it include long years of suffering for the gospel? Well, perhaps it did for some. Does it include humility of serving others that are ungrateful, undeserving? Absolutely. This is how it is for all of us who want to follow Jesus. And so I want to ask, are you ready for either? Let's respond to God. Let's tell him, I'm willing to live for you. Or, if the situation presents itself, I'm willing to die for you. But whatever it is, my life is for you. Let's join with Jesus in his prayer, not my will, but yours be done. God bless you, church. I'm praying for you. I'm thinking of you. I hope that you and I will be able to make it through this difficult, challenging time, drinking the cup that's set before us, and we'll come out of it even stronger. God bless you.